You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Archaeotech Podcast, episode 95. I'm your host, Chris Webster, with my co-host, Paul Zimmerman. Today, on this last episode of 2018, we talk about a recent paper that dealt with using a tablet to record ceramics and how it compared to, well, not using a tablet. Let's get to it. All right, Paul, welcome to the podcast. How's it going?
It's going great today. How are you doing?
Good. We're recording in one of those weird dimensional things that have to do with podcasts where we're recording before Christmas, but this is coming out after Christmas, which is a pretty big event in a lot of people's lives. Obviously, not everyone celebrates Christmas, but a good portion of the listening audience probably does. And it's just a weird kind of thing because we're recording this, and when we release it, I'll be in North Carolina. We're recording it. I'm not in North Carolina. It's just all strange. So anyway, how's it going over there?
That's good. Good. You have big plans coming up?
8 days in North Carolina. So yeah, like I said, and we're signing on a house in the meantime in between there. So lots of things going on. Nice. All right. Well, we've got a bunch of people on the call right now, 5 to be exact, and they are all authors and or participated in a paper that we read that was released in the Society for American Archaeological Journal, Advances in Archaeological Practice, and we will link to that in the show notes. But the article was called Mobilization as Mediation, Implementing a Tablet-Based Recording System for Ceramic Classification. And we're going to talk to, it looks like, just about everybody that was on that paper right now. But first, we're going to have them introduce themselves. So Parker, go ahead.
Hi, thanks so much for having us on here. I'm Parker Van Valkenburg. I'm assistant professor of anthropology at Brown University. And my role in this was as the project director of the Proyecto Arqueológico Saña Colonial, a project that we've been running since 2009 in coastal Peru. And I'm the first author on the publication.
Okay. And from here on out, I will have you pronounce that, not me, because it would be useless. All right. And next, Chiara.
Hi, so I'm Chiara. I'm one of the 4 students who works on this project along with Parker. My main role in this project was I helped with the experimental design, and I came with a little bit of archaeology background in Italy, where I had worked at an archaeological site for a few years. So it was really, really cool to get the shift to, Peruvian archaeology.
Nice. Brian.
I'm Brian Balson-Stanton. I'm the Solutions Architect for Digital Humanities in the Faculty of Arts at Macquarie University. I'm also the Technical Director of the FAMES project, and I helped both with the documentation supplied to these folks to build their module and for some troubleshooting as well.
Awesome. And Jackson.
Hi. I was a computer science student at Brown, and my role was in the implementation of the module.
Okay. And Louisa.
Hi, like Chiara and Jackson, I was a student at Brown at the time, and I was the head student archaeologist on the team and also helped with the visual design of the application.
Awesome. Sounds good. So we're going to jump right into this. Parker, why don't you give us an overview on this project as it pertains to the paper and what we're talking about here?
Yeah, great. Thank you. So the broader context in which we did this work was we were wrapping up lab work on a project that had been going on for 3 or 4 years. And we're facing the daunting task of having to analyze 50 or 60,000 sherds and get them into a spreadsheet of some sort to analyze them. And we'd had a really great experience working with a FAMES module in the field that we used for recording field data. What we found implementing that module is that it really greatly improved the richness and the integrity of our data, eliminating a lot of the errors that we'd suffered in previous years using a paper-based system. And as a result, I really think that the conclusions we were able to reach were much more robust than the work that we had previously done using our former recording-based system. So we were excited also by the fact that FAMES allows users to do relatively light lifting in the development of XML-based modules to create your own classification systems. Mm-hmm. I myself am not, I don't code, but there were grants available at Brown University to involve students in research. And I thought it would be really exciting to bring someone like Jackson and someone like Chiara on board who had some coding experience to help us develop this module discuss best practices here on campus, and then take it down to Peru and actually implement it. And in the process, try to formally observe how it affected the way that we did research. So the paper is the result of that, and it's kind of it's a funky paper in the sense that on the one hand, we're trying to use quantitative data to evaluate the module's performance, but I also wanted to take the opportunity to really reflect on what it is that mobile technologies do to the way that we work, and in turn, how that effective transformation, as we call it in the paper, ultimately changes the quality of the data that emerges. So there's a bit of a kind of science and technology studies, STS, element to the paper, and then there's also kind of a more conventional performance analysis. So it's multimodal. And going back and reading it, I'm still happy with it, but I'm interested to hear what you guys have to say as well, what your reactions were.
Sure. Yeah, and we're going to talk about that more than likely in the second segment, because I was very interested by that too. I work in the digital archaeology and really software selling sector for this, and I'm very interested in those aspects of the paper as well. You know, what the reactions of people and how they were working together. Before we get to that, though, a few more questions for you, Parker. What made you want to try out tablet recording or FAMES, or were you seeking out some kind of tablet recording system or just some kind of digital recording system? How did that come about?
It's largely based on the observation from our first field season on this project, when we were doing extensive excavations, working with a team in which not everybody shared the same native language, going home, taking a look at the data and realizing that in some cases it just wasn't as good as I'd hoped that it would be. And I'd read a little bit, in a few places, John Walrot's blog, Paperless Archaeology. So this is back in around 2013 when we first started thinking about this. A colleague mentioned FAMES, and I read up, and it sounded like a great fit. So I reached out to Sean Ross and Adela and Brian, specifically thinking that using a FAMES-based system in the field would enable us to really just improve the quality of our data. And as time went on, we realized that there were other advantages to using a tablet-based system, but it was really that kind of mechanical goal that we started with.
So let's talk about FAMES a little bit. Brian, you work with FAMES. Why don't you tell everybody what the platform FAMES works on, like in the field, the realistic platform that works on in the field, and why you guys designed this and how it worked. Those are three questions I'll remind you in the end.
that is a big set of three questions.
Yes, sir.
We have plenty of papers on that set of three questions. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. FAMES is a field recording app for Android. And it came about because Sean and Adela tried to make bespoke software for their Bulgaria field recording in 2010 or so. And it turns out that making software is really tedious and really expensive, and for some odd reason, right? And so what our intention has been is to create a common platform for field recording. The way we've discovered how to sell it is as an electronic field notebook, because it's a way of collecting data according to whatever methodology the researchers have while in the field on multiple devices with GIS built in while offline for eventual synchronization. And it turns out that adding all of those adjectives into the same software makes it fairly complex. Okay.
Now, what about the customization you can do with FAMES? I'm actually a little curious because this part was, I wouldn't say confusing, but if you didn't have a fundamental knowledge of how FAMES works and things like that, how the article, Parker, maybe you can speak to this, and Brian, how you guys integrated what became known as PAZ-C, or I'm not sure how you pronounce that, PAZ-C. First, tell us what that is. Maybe Brian, you can start with that, and then how, what is that? How did that implement and enhance what FAMES did?
So I need to use some jargon here, and I apologize. There's the idea of a module. And so when we were doing our initial stock take in 2012, we asked 80 archaeologists to come into the same room and agree on something. Turns out this was unwise. and so what I was handed this set of conflicting requirements. And what I realized was we need a generalized solution to create arbitrary workflows. And so in order to do that, there's the idea of a module, which is the specific research workflow for a given researcher that can be implemented with far less complexity than the entire platform. And the way to think about the FAMES app in itself is it's a web browser. It renders pages, but it doesn't actually do any data collection for specific researchers.
And what that meant for us is that we could effectively take the idiosyncrasies of our recording system, the things that matter to us, the things that we want to label, so attributes that were already in our paper-based database, and then translate those relatively simply into the digital format or platform that FAMES provided.
Mm-hmm.
The system that Brian and Sean and Adela and their colleagues built allows people to add attribute fields and specific values really relatively easily, including when one is in the field itself.
All right. Well, I'm planning on having an entire episode on FAMES because, with Brian and the other, the other founders that you guys are mentioning of FAMES, because FAMES was on episode 7 of the Archaeotech podcast, which I had 100% forgot about until I heard Brian's voice. And that was a few years ago. And FAMES has, of course, like software does, evolved and presumably gotten much better and more stable as software does. And so we're going to talk about that. So Jackson, you worked on some of the coding for the FAMES software. What kind of challenges did you encounter while coding that software?
The biggest challenge I faced was using a relatively obscure coding language for the nuts and bolts aspect of the module, which was Bean Shell, which is JavaScript-esque, but not JavaScript. And for that, I had to get Brian's help sometimes. But it really went pretty smoothly. The FAMES app provides a sophisticated workbench, so to speak, and toolkit for developing these specific bespoke journals, or what was the word you guys used earlier? Archaeological
notebooks and
notebooks,
modules in FAMES.
Yeah.
So were you doing this work back in the States? Were you doing the work in the field? Did you go along with them to help develop it while it was doing it? Was this all done pre-planned and then taken out as a finished package into the field? How did this work?
Started it back in the United States and then finished it in Lima.
Great.
Wow.
So you were alongside the rest of the project in the field, developing, I guess, as they were asking for new features or new fields.
Yep.
And that worked well?
Yeah, that was great. They would provide feedback, because we could develop as much as we wanted in the United States, but that doesn't really mean anything until people have tested it and told you what works well and what doesn't. And it was nice to be able to respond and make changes in real time.
Well, the responding and making changes, I guess that's a question. I don't know who wants to cover this, Chiara or Luisa, but because I've got down here, both of you were involved in implementation and designing. I guess that you were the major interfaces between who's using it and who's developing on the back end. Is that correct?
Yeah, we both had a hand in that, absolutely.
Nice.
And what was that process like?
So, one of the things I just wanted to add on to what Jackson was saying is that it was really striking how useful it was to be able to make changes to the program when we were in the field. So there were all sorts of issues that we didn't anticipate that arose when we started working with the rest of the team in Lima. And it was fantastic to be able to go in, make a quick change, and then have it ready to use again the next day.
That's nice that it's flexible that way anyway.
Exactly. So One thing is we really wanted to make it accessible in terms of language. So we had it available in both English and Spanish, and there were a lot of tweaks in that sense. We had a lot of tweaks on how we uploaded the data, how we saved all the data at the end of the day, because it's, massive amounts of data with, about 12 people working on it every day. So that was another big aspect of it for us.
And maybe this is a follow-up question for Parker, but if the data collection is being changed on the fly in the field, was that did that add extra challenges for you trying to make sense of it, or did you just run with it?
One of the advantages that we had is we had we'd used more or less the same classification system in previous years. So that the number of times when we needed to fundamentally modify attribute values or add new ones was relatively rare, but there were some basic performance issues that we had to work through at the very beginning. And the nice thing is that we were working in a lab context where, rather than being out in the barren desert with sand blowing in your face and, rotting carcasses of large mammals right next to you, we were in Lima in an apartment, and we were able to pause and say, okay, guys, let's tweak a couple of things and come back to the ceramics in 2 days. And in the meantime, let's work on something else. So in a laboratory-based context, it proved to be not nearly as much of a challenge as it would have been had we been doing this out in the field.
I'm wondering, in just the last minute or so here, you guys mentioned how, and I think this can be answered pretty quickly and possibly by Parker, but yeah, something I got out of the article was you mentioned that using and learning code books for data entry is obviously cumbersome. And codes, in my experience, because we use codes on Nevada IMAX forms and the whole IMAX system for recording archaeological sites out here in the West, they used to use codes because those 2-digit or 2-letter codes would go into this coding form, which went into the old computer system that was developed in the 80s. And it was just easier, first off, to enter a 2-letter thing than say, Elko eared projectile point. And also, the computer had a limited amount of space. So it would take up less space to enter the codes. Now, people are still using codes universally in archaeology. Now, when you guys created this whole system, did you add the codes to the system and people were still using codes, but they had maybe an explanation for them? Or are you finding that codes are no longer necessary for this whole process?
That's really fascinating. I mean, the kind of archaeology of the code system that we use now. Right. And I never really considered that. I'd always assumed that it was something to do with wanting to fit things onto spreadsheets that you could see on the same page without having to expand them out, which is also an advantage, I guess. Maybe that helps to explain why they've been maintained. So what we did, and there's actually a couple of images of this in the article itself, is we tried to incorporate the names of the codes into these scroll button menus that also include images of the same attributes that are being described by the codes. And of course, what we found was that some people knew the codes better than others, and other people applied the codes to things that they didn't seem to correspond to. And our intuition was, well, hell, if you put an image into the data entry system, then you can reduce some of the ambiguity associated with the code. And what we found is that was definitely the case with certain attributes, but it wasn't the case with others. And that in turn led us to some interesting conclusions, I think, about the database that we were using in the first place. The problem oftentimes when we weren't able to reduce inter-observer error wasn't that FAMES wasn't doing its job. It's that the database included some fundamental ambiguities, and the switch between one medium of data entry and another really helped to highlight that.
Okay.
That's interesting.
All right. Well, that's it for segment 1. I think we're probably going to do 3 segments on this because we just have so much to talk about. So if you guys have the time, I know we said 2 segments, but we'll talk about that later. We'll see what we get done next time. In the meantime, take a listen to this ad for one of our sponsors, and we'll be back in just a second. Hey, podcast fans and digital archaeologists. Have you heard about WildNote? It's a data collection app that works online or offline on your smartphone or tablet, iOS or Android. It allows you to collect field data easily, manage data efficiently, and generate data reports and site records effortlessly. We have a growing list of state site forms built in for your use and some generic forms that will work anywhere. Check out the shovel testing and photograph forms. You can get a free all-access 30-day trial today by going to wildnoteapp.com. That's wildnoteapp.com for your free 30-day trial. Now back to the show.
Hey there, entrepreneurs. What's the easiest choice you can make? Outsourcing tasks you hate. What about selling with Shopify? Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. From the launch your online shop stage to the first real-life store stage, all the way to the did we just hit 1 million orders stage, Shopify's there to help you grow. Whether you're selling scented soap or outdoor outfits, Shopify helps you sell everywhere. With their all-in-one e-commerce platform and in-person POS system, Shopify's got you covered. Shopify helps turn browsers into buyers with the internet's best converting checkout, 36% better on average. Plus, you can sell more with less effort thanks to Shopify Magic, your AI-powered all-star. I love how Shopify gives you everything you need to take control and take your business to the next level. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/DAX, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/DAX now to grow your business, no matter what stage you're in. That's shopify.com/DAX.
All right, welcome back to episode 95 of the Archaeotech podcast. And we are talking about an article regarding essentially using tablets to record ceramics down in Peru. And we've got the authors of the paper online here. I want to ask Parker, there's another quote I pulled out of the article here that says, tablet users engaged in fewer critical discussions of artifact attributes during the data entry process, which I thought was really interesting because we focus a lot on digital archaeology about talking about, what software are you using? What are the, what are the intricacies of it? We spent the first segment talking a lot about FAMES, and coding and, how do the codes work and all these things, but we don't often talk about the actual practice of how does this change how we interact with each other and with the actual recording process? How does this affect everything? I'm very interested in this because I use a lot of tablets when I do my CRM archaeology, but a lot of times we're out in the field and still interacting with each other, but in a lab environment, it seems very different. So can you speak to that just a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. I think that in that sense, the implementation of tablets or digital technologies in the field isn't particularly different than, say, excavation. Mary Layton, a colleague who works at the intersections of archaeology and science and technology studies, has written a couple of papers suggesting that excavation techniques have effectively been black boxed, which is Bruno Latour's term for removed from scientific discussion. There are things that we do that we don't talk about because nobody wants to know how the sausage is made, and sometimes, and quite literally, there are things we don't want to. They're ugly things we don't want to talk about how we do archaeology. Mm-hmm. And I think what we tried to do in the paper and what we tried to do during the implementation was actually keep our senses attuned to what was actually happening as we use this new system. And I think that in the same way that we were talking a little bit earlier about the legacies of certain forms of data collection and the way that they're embedded in media that we no longer use, that require us to do this kind of media archaeology. Similarly, there are tendencies that we inherit from our use of these technologies in other contexts. Most of the people on the project, myself included, have tablets. Certain habits that we engage in when we use them, and one of which is to kind of zone out. And we found that people in the lab, when they were using the tablet-based system alone, which was the goal, we were hoping to be able to multiply the number of working groups at any one time. So people started working. It's repetitive work. They plugged in earphones into the tablets and started listening to music and didn't engage in the same types of discussion that they had to when they were working in teams using our paper-based system. So it's sort of like the impedances or the friction or drag that's introduced into the data entry system by paper, by this cumbersome system, requires you to talk critically about your attributes. And that in some cases led to the positive result of maybe having more critically assigned values. In the write-up process, Brian stopped me at one point and said, why the hell didn't you actually just have people working in pairs, mm-hmm. Using the tablets? And I think that's one of the practical suggestions that emerged from the paper, that critical discussion of attributions is a really valuable thing. And if your tablet-based system like ours led to fewer critical discussions, then maybe you want to reconfigure how labor is organized and encourage people to talk to each other.
So was the initial assumption when you use tablets that, okay, now we have this device and it's kind of small and it's right in front of me, therefore, one person, right? That was kind of the initial. That's interesting. It's really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. I think we assumed that the visual components of the tablet-based entry system would lead to fewer errors and mm-hmm. that it would obviate the need for these kind of critical discussions. And people could just punch at the screen, point to similarities in the artifacts that they were labeling and the images on the screen and not need to talk about them. And in retrospect, we realized that was an improper assumption.
Okay.
I actually have a follow-up question to that. This article you talk about trying to assess and designing a test to assess the speed, the accuracy of data entry with this system versus your old system. Do you intend to do anything like that going forward? Do we have people enter the data on tablets in teams versus alone, so you can compare to see if Brian's supposition is right?
Yeah, that would be great. That set of materials is now locked up in a dungeon somewhere that will require us to go through a cumbersome process of permitting to get access to it again. So it's not like we've got it in our backyard. That particular data set, we could certainly go back to it, but I'm more interested in potentially doing something like that on the next project that I've started, and doing sort of a more standard kind of rigorous product test. Mm-hmm. The thing about this is actually something that we ran into during the review process. The test that we did and the test we presented, there isn't kind of a strict product performance test. It was something that one of many different techniques we tried to employ to just keep track of how this new system was affecting the way that we worked. Mm-hmm. And in that sense, it was documentary rather than experimental.
Okay. Louisa, we're going to go to you next because we haven't heard from you yet in this podcast, and I'm interested in your thoughts. Please remind us what your role was in this project.
Sure. So I was the head student archaeologist, and I was helping the fourth undergraduate student who was working with us, Jake, with the visual design of the application. So while we worked with Jackson and Chiara very closely to try and figure out how best to represent these documentation categories in ways that were easy to access, because as you can read in the article, one of the main criticisms both we and previous researchers who had used the codebook had was that it was cumbersome and difficult to navigate. So our idea, one of the biggest goals, I think, of this project was to make it much more accessible and a more efficient data entry system. And in order to do that, we added the scroll down menus, and Jake and I really worked on getting accessible and easy to see illustrations that would visualize things such as, ceramic type and surface decoration and surface damage and things like that.
Mm-hmm. I'm wondering if in your discussions of that, because you said something that sounded very similar to something I've been thinking about, and when you do research into other systems, you find that archaeology is a little bit behind in this respect. I've been thinking something for like ceramic cataloging. Now, I'm not sure how much actual analysis you guys were doing, but if it was just cataloging, then it almost seems like a pure visual-based system would be something that this would kind of evolve into, where it really is just, honestly, it's just pictures. It's just like, is it this? Okay, there's a decision tree. No, it's not. It's this, it's this, it's this. And you just keep moving down the line. And we looked at stuff like that for projectile points and other things as well. Is that something you guys ever discussed where you were out there, as how this system could evolve in, years into the future?
Yeah, I think we had discussions of both the past and the future of ceramic classifications many times. And I think one of the things that came out of the project that we realized was that the illustrations helped in some respects. So I think we mentioned that for firing, for example, that had been a category that had confused many people. It was one of the ones with the most inconsistencies, and adding the images did help decrease those inconsistencies, but adding images to a lot of other forms, other attribute categories, didn't really help that much. So then it became a question of whether that was an issue of ceramic classification itself, or if it was an issue of the illustrations we were using, or if people just weren't really familiar with the forms themselves. So I think that's a really interesting question. Is ceramic classification itself, or the way we conduct it, inherently problematic?
Quick question related to the classification for people who haven't read the article. Were you fitting the ceramics into a pre-existing typology, or for anybody who was working on the project, were you working on a pre-existing typology, or were you developing one here?
Well, this is a pre-existing typology that I think, like many typologies, has its own particular history. Ours builds on classification systems that were developed by scholars working in adjacent valleys on the coast of Peru. Mm-hmm. And then also, because we're dealing with colonial material, we also drew on the work of people like Kathleen Deegan and historical archaeologists working in the Circumcaribbean region. So it's a bit of a chimera. And then, of course, there's all the stuff that we found that we couldn't find equivalents for in previous publications.
You know, I'm wondering, Louisa, when we were talking about the visual system, it seems like it's a dual problem of, you know, training and the visual system for classification, because people often try to think it's one or the other. Like, well, I'm either going to be well-trained in ceramics and I can just describe this stuff because I can understand all of it, or visual system. But I think a combined system is really what we need, because in my experience, relying on a visual system for anything, people tend to want to drop stuff into these visual boxes really easily without really understanding what they mean. It's like, well, it kind of looks like that, so I'm going to drop it over here.
Right. Definitely.
Is that kind of what you guys were saying?
Yeah. And I think one of the things that happened with the tablets as well is, as Parker and others were saying before, we had much less discussion. So people were talking about the forms much less. And I think that when we were using the spreadsheet and codebook, we could discuss them more. And we could add different forms if we thought something didn't fit into a previous typology. So I think that's one of the things that came out of this, that discussion is really helpful too. So it's not just looking at a picture and trying to match it to that. It's rather trying to work through this single shirt and talking to others and trying to figure out what it is.
Parker, do you think that the experience you had doing this, well, first off, we know the delay in paper publication cycles, so I'm not sure how many times you've actually done this since then. But you know, how many have you actually done this in another field session since you guys wrote the paper?
No, we haven't.
Okay.
Yeah, the new main field project that I'm working on is in a totally different region, so we'll need to start from scratch. But I think what's exciting is that we can more or less use the same. We won't be able to use the same module. We'll need to create new attribute values, but we can use really similar forms. And the tech that we bought to run the FAMES system needs to be updated. But now that we know how to use it, the learning curve is much less steep, even for applying it in a new project. And I fully intend to use a system like this the next time we have to analyze tens of thousands of ceramics.
Yeah. I'm wondering why are the attributes going to change so much? Are you still analyzing ceramics on this new project?
Yeah, we are, but working in a different region. So the forms of vessels are quite different, and the specific categories of decoration are different. So the attributes themselves aren't changing, but the field values certainly will.
Gotcha. Okay, so you might not have to start totally from scratch, right?
No. We should just be able. I mean, the great thing is that the FAMES server, which you can just access by connecting from a laptop, allows you to continually add and edit attribute values in the field. And so, you know, we could really rename the module and then implement it like that.
Okay.
So, kind of an implementation detail here about how you worked with it. In most of the projects I've been on, there is, you know, a dedicated one or two ceramicists that are working, analyzing the pottery. Other people might do some initial culling, trying to find, cleaning and trying to find diagnostics. How much training with the ceramics was necessary to bring people up to speed with this? And do you think that having this tablet-based system, maybe I'm predetermining the answer here with the question, but do you think that having this tablet-based system meant that you could have less ceramic-specific training amongst the field staff?
That's a great question. We don't have. I mean, there are people who specialize in analyzing the aggregated ceramic data, but unlike large projects that I think of in the Mediterranean and to a certain extent domestically in the US, where you've got tons and tons of students and relatively highly trained people. In Peru, the average project is smaller and the labor is less specialized. So it's quite uncommon to find a ton of PhDs working on the same project. In this case, we had a great team of Peruvian archaeologists and archaeology students, some of whom I'd worked with before and some of whom had learned the system. And they were really the people who provided kind of lateral training for new members of the project, both Peruvian and foreign. So we spent a few days before they got to going to try to train people, but there was sort of no formalized training program, where you're run through a series of trials in order to make sure that you know exactly how to do things. I think that's certainly not a bad idea if you're dealing with a really large team. In this case, there have been a number of people, including my colleague Rebecca Bria, who works in a different part of Peru, who've been able to effectively use tablet-based systems on field schools in order to streamline the learning process. And I think there's some great potentials there. In our experience, though, I don't, thinking back to some of the things we've already talked about, I wouldn't say that the tablet-based system enabled training to happen more efficiently. And at least the fact that we didn't see substantially improved results in the consistency of data in a number of different fields suggests to me that using that system, or using the training system that we implemented, didn't improve accuracy. And I think there's a risk, again, thinking that if you throw a digital tool at a product at a problem, that it can solve, because people seem more engaged as they do the work, that they actually are going to produce better data.
Okay, Brian.
So a note on tools. The technology is an amplifier for design, and what is a training-based workflow or a high accuracy or high efficiency based workflow is very different, as I think that Parker and I discovered. And one thing that modules take beforehand is an unusually large amount of testing relative to a paper-based workflow where it can be worked out in the field. And that's something that most people aren't expecting. And so just to temper expectations, the quality of this research, because it is research just like any other, is entirely proportionate to the amount of prep. And there aren't many shortcuts that we're used to from other magic technologies.
Nice. Well, we're going to take our final break right now, and I'm going to say one thing leading out of this break is, and I'm a paper hater, so and people listening to the show know that. I'm going to disagree with you on one thing, is that paper's more easy to, I guess, adjust in the field. I have been on projects where forms were either invented or redesigned for a project, usually like excavation projects. And one thing was wrong on the form that they had 1,000 copies printed of before we went out into the field, because we were going into nowhere where we could have more copies printed. And we had to manually change this thing. And it was pretty fundamental to the organization of the project. Some people remembered to do it. Some people did not. And it became a huge nightmare in the end. And if we were able to on the fly change the system and the way it records and the way it displays in a digital format, then I feel like on that particular project anyway, we could have avoided a lot of problems. So I'm always for the digital solution if we can fix it. Anyway, we'll talk about this some more on the other side of this break when we come back for the last segment of episode 95 of the Archaeotech podcast. Be right back. This network is listener supported. We're trying to move away from paid advertising while also creating new shows and supporting the ones we have. The APN has never and will never make a serious profit on our podcast. Every little dime we make goes back into the network and improving show quality. So become a member today at www.arcpodnet.com/members to show your support, get some extras, and be a benefactor for archaeological education. Members get stickers, a coffee mug, a t-shirt, bonus content, early access to episodes, a private Slack team to talk to other members and the hosts, and full access to training on Team Black over at arccert.black. So check out our memberships at www.arcpodnet.com/members today and support archaeological education. That's www.arcpodnet.com/members. Now back to the show.
Chicken tacos should only be trusted to chicken professionals.
That's where we come in. Introducing Zaxby's new chicken finger tacos. One comes with pico de gallo and creamy chipotle ranch. And the other comes with bacon, lettuce, tomato, and avocado ranch. Chicken experts since 1990. Chicken taco experts since now. Order yours today in the Zax Rewards app. Woo, saucy! Zaxby's.
All right, welcome back to the third segment, the rare third segment of the Archaeotech podcast, episode 95. We're going to forego the app of the day segment because we've just got so much to talk about with this, and it's rare that we get this many people on, so I want to maximize that time. Okay, so we're going to run around the room here real quick and ask each one of you, what is your biggest takeaway that's positive about this experience, from using the application or just the process itself or something like that? And then what is something that you noticed the biggest thing you would improve upon in this entire process, from training to the software to the hardware to whatever the case may be? And we're going to go down my list in no particular order, and we'll start with Jackson. Jackson, what are your two big takeaways from this?
The positive takeaway is that I just chose to start with a positive takeaway. I didn't have one in mind specifically.
There we go. That's the planning with the tools.
The positive takeaway is that with very little, I had never used XML, or I'd used it only very briefly for an assignment before trying to develop one of these modules. And I had never used Bean Shell or JavaScript or anything related to it. And without much prior exposure to the specific coding tools needed to set up one of these modules, FAMES allowed me to get running, get on my feet pretty quickly with actually creating forms that someone could use, or at least we could imagine people using. And I can't think of anything that I would change that we haven't already discussed or that wasn't apparent as we were in the process of using the technology.
Okay. Well, that's good. Yeah. From your standpoint, I mean, I like the fact that it was easy to really get up to speed on and just dive into. So that's pretty great.
Yeah. Not much of a learning curve. That's how I'd concisely say that.
That is important with archaeologists, as we all know. All right. So, Louisa, you're next. So what were your big takeaways from this project?
Sure. I think what I really enjoyed was working with the Peruvian archaeologists and really developing it on site with them, and especially the use of Spanish, both Spanish and English, I think was really important both for them and for us, and to try and figure out how to word things in both languages and how to best frame things in both languages, I think showed everyone, or at least it definitely showed me, how important it is to really consider who is on the team and how they work and what's important to each one. As far as what I would improve from my part of the project, I think the Peruvian archaeologists mentioned that the images were sometimes hard to see, and I think this is not something we had figured out how to do in FAMES, and Brian, if you want to speak to this later, but they all said that they would have liked to be able to zoom in to the images or make them bigger. So I think figuring out a way to best display the images would have helped, and might have helped with decreasing inconsistencies as well.
Just to respond to that, the Lake Mungo project actually has a similar pattern, and they extensively used the description components, where if you push and hold, it brings up what amounts to a manual page for that item. And so that's one place that could very much be expanded upon without limit for instruction and discussion of what a particular attribute means.
Okay. So Chiara, we'll go to you next. What were your big takeaways from the project?
Yeah, so overall it was just an incredible experience, and I really love and understand the importance of combining, archaeology with the growing digital world. I would say overall my biggest takeaways were the negative side, probably, as we discussed, the fact that since we were all documenting and recording these ceramics individually, it was somewhat isolating, but this will completely be resolved in the future when it reverts to a system of working in pairs. So I think that was a really important lesson from the project overall, that the social aspect of the analysis is really important.
Okay.
The other thing that was positive that I really appreciated was that the system really helped us iron out any consistencies. So at the very beginning, a few times, the use of images helped us realize that two people considered, certain firing patterns different, or certain designs, or, the lip of the pot, how that looked. They were classifying it in different ways. And it was really great to see that, having this unified tool could help us reach a more unified, consistent, and better result.
Okay. Well, that's good. Consistency of results is, I think, every archaeologist's dream in, getting everybody to kind of be on the same page with how they analyze stuff. That's the hard part. All right. So Parker, we'll go to you next. We're skipping Brian, you might notice, because at his request, and I was going to request it anyway, because we're going to have him and the FAMES team on a separate podcast. So we'll go FAMES. We'll go deep on FAMES at some point here in the future. But Parker, my question for you is the same. But first, how much did you pay everyone again to say favorable things about all this? No?
I redirected money from our wonderful university, but I hope that they're not feeling forced to do this. And it was really one of the most fun projects I've ever done from top to bottom with such a great team of people. Mm-hmm. The big picture thing for me, to be a bit more abstract about it, is I think that it's really exciting that implementing digital tools is making us talk about aspects of archaeological data recording that we never talked about before, or at least that I never talked about before. It could just be my graduate training or my undergraduate training or whatnot. I really do think that when done right, tablet-based recording and any number of different forms of digital data capture, aggregation, and analysis invite us to think about how we do what we do, and to reconsider some of the not dark assumptions, but unacknowledged assumptions that are built into our training, built into the habits that we have as archaeologists. And our paper, the part of the paper that I think I'm most proud of is the aspect that does that. And it's sort of the general way that I try to approach digital archaeology in multiple domains, not just using digital tools in the field, but also analyzing satellite imagery and doing spatial analysis and so on and so forth.
Well, I'm glad you guys had a positive experience doing this, because I talked to a lot of people about digital archaeology, and you first have the conversation of, digital or not digital with somebody, especially in cultural resource management. It's either you're going to pry my notebook from my cold, dead hands, or, give you that tablet. There's really no in between. And I'm glad you guys are favorable towards this and the learning curve, because, I can give you my answer to this, but I think everybody probably knows my answer to this. But Parker, do you think that, first off, it seems like digital archaeology and recording on tablets or some sort of interface like that is inevitable in archaeology, and just figuring out the right way to do it and the right way to interface it is really our jobs right now. Do you think you guys are on the way there? Do you think you're on the way to developing a good system that works for you as you move into more and more projects? Or do you see bigger, fundamental changes in how we're doing digital archaeology coming down the line before we really decide on something?
Great question. I think that I figured out a system that works for me, or at least has worked for me in the context of two different projects. But the system hasn't, and the goal has never been to sort of rid ourselves of the scourge of paper and go fully digital. That may work for some people, but what we found is that there's certain aspects, for example, drawing. On this project in the field, we found that there was just so much skill that team members had developed in learning how to accurately draw archaeological contexts. I suck at drawing, but these incredibly talented Peruvian colleagues didn't want to give up the graph paper that they had learned how to really make art on. And we can't use paper in the place where I'm working now, Chachapoyas, because it rains all the time. And that forces us to have to think differently about how we're capturing our data. We've done more digital data recording in the field, but I'm a firm believer that there are just certain things that drawing forces you to do that you can't reproduce with photogrammetry. The fact that certain forms of digital data recording allow you to think that you can postpone interpretation in the field is somewhat dangerous. And so I think that rather than treating the digital transition as something that's inevitable, we should imagine it as something that's contextual, and that a certain amount of digital is good for some people and different forms of digital are good for others. We need to build in systems of performance evaluation into our own projects to see what seems to be working and what doesn't, rather than deciding ahead of time that we're going to do it this way or the highway, and being inflexible about changing it.
Nice. What are some of the, and anybody can chime in on this really, what are some of the more out of box thinking types of things you guys were thinking of that, even if it's fantastical way in the future? I mean, right when you were saying drawing and photogrammetry and infield analysis, I was thinking, man, if I had a really good photogrammetric sequence and I had a 3D representation, if I could just put on like Oculus Rift or something like that, where I could then see it 3-dimensional, then could I draw it on paper using all these things? I was like, I don't know, maybe not. But you guys must have had discussions while you were out there about, using this sort of technology. I mean, let's think outside of the box. Where would you guys go if money and research grants were no object?
Yeah, it's a great. The question of VR, it sort of takes us in different directions, and I haven't worked as extensively trying to get our models into Unity and building sort of 3-dimensional environments. A couple colleagues like Steve Wernke at Vanderbilt University have done really great things with this. Being there, being able to go back there, particularly when you do it in a big room. I was in this conference where Steve showed it was about 20 historians a model of a colonial church and colonial town that he and some students had built. And he had one of his graduate students with an Oculus Rift on, and then his screen, what he could see was projected back up onto the screen in this auditorium. And as we moved around the site, these historians who had never been to a site like that before, started noticing all of these really incredible things. Oh, that's where the priest sleeps. That reminds me a lot of this text that I read here and there. So as an interpretive tool, that's really exciting. But to be honest, I don't think that the folks, including Steve, who are doing that would suggest that they can truly supplant the types of in-field multi-sensory experiences you can have. I mean, yeah, you can touch the texture of something in a profile to tell it. You can spray it with water and see the way that the water evaporates over time. You can smell I worked on a colonial site on the coast of Peru, Magdalena de Cao, where everything was so well preserved that the middens still stank, and there was tallow candles we dug out, and a piece of a prayer book that somebody had later used as toilet paper. Indigenous resistance to colonialism is what we call it. Those sorts of multi-sensory encounters aren't things that you can capture with a camera. So I don't think that, in terms of out-of-the-box thinking, I'd love to have a system in which we have constant photo capture of the context that we're digging, so that we can not just recreate in static sequences the context that we dig, but actually go back and monitor practices and patterns and digitally re-excavate the context. But I think that there's probably thinking beyond the visual is maybe the great frontier that I hope we get to in my lifetime. I'm thinking about ways to record not just the visual properties of the sites we dig, but other kinds of textures. Nice.
Yeah, I think we've definitely talked about some stuff like that before on this show, recording those different senses, essentially. I'm wondering, we just have a few minutes to go here. You mentioned using FAMES and reprogramming it for this new project. Have you looked at, in the meantime, forgetting that Brian is on the call, any other software or anything else that you're evaluating or want to evaluate for the new project?
Yeah, the one thing that we have looked at is for landscape level data collection, ArcGIS Collector. And there were some aspects of using it that were great. The ability to rapidly integrate data that we collected in the field with our existing ArcGIS databases was wonderful, but one of the really great limitations of using systems like that sync remotely is that when you are in a place with no internet connection, and the closest internet connection that's 3 hours drive away isn't any good, you're kind of up a creek when you can't. It's really difficult to back up your data, and it's really difficult to sync. And sometimes you're in the field and you need to have a cellular data connection in order to even be able to log into the damn program. And the great thing about the FAME system that we've been using is that we've got a local server back in the dig house that we sync to every evening. And, we've been talking mostly about the way we use FAMES for ceramic recording on this podcast, but we also used it for field recording. And in my new project, we use more or less the same module that we used for the last excavation project. We just changed some attributes and relabeled the module, and we were good to go using all the same hardware that we had before. So it was really kind of a no-brainer. The system would work so well for us that we've just stuck with it.
Paul, do you got any final questions?
No, I mean, this has been all over the place. I do have one kind of comment, very minor, much when you said features you liked or where you'd go in the future. I was caught by one thing that's mentioned in the article. You have an uncertainty slider where the data enters can say, how sure they are about something that they've entered into the field. And I thought that was great. The only place I've seen that before was on the database I made for myself for my dissertation. But I would like to add that human element into a lot of the data collection, where you could try to assess, how certain one is about things, how, it's, I don't even have a coherent thought about it. It's just that I thought that was such a very cool element that you added. Was that part of FAMES, or is that something that you added in your own?
So I spent quite a lot of time thinking about data collection when I was designing FAMES. And that's why I have both annotations and certainty as part of a fundamental data structure. I don't think there's much evidence of many archaeologists using certainty in the field all that much, but that is something that many of the technologists I've talked to have really liked, where any single observation can be quantified on a scale from 0 to 1 of how certain you are.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's just a research tradition where some people are used to scribbling question marks in the margins, other people are used to writing in the margins, and I wanted to be able to allow for that.
I think that's great. Maybe we can discuss that more when we have you back on.
I hope you do. The issue was clarified for me a little bit during the review process. We had one reviewer who seemed to think that certainty fields were the scourge of God, and that had a database design philosophy that didn't allow for uncertainty. But I think that the prospect of being able to actually map out uncertainty and think about what are the parts of our database that invite more uncertainty, and you think about working in the field, are there certain types of contexts also that are harder for people to kind of get a grasp on, and why is that? I think that's interesting.
No, I think it's very important. I mean, we're always questioning our own data collection. We're always questioning the data collection and the conclusions of others. So it makes sense that you could try to bring it in a systematic way into the systematized data collection. So kudos.
Yeah. Well, on that note, we will talk to Brian and the rest of the FAMES team, like I said, on a future episode. In the meantime, I want to thank everybody for coming on. I just want to say, in response to the last conversation there, I've never used certainty in the field. I use a lot of uncertainty in the field, and that's really how I operate. No, I'm just kidding. So anyway, thank you everybody for coming on. Thanks for publishing this paper, because so many people, like I said early on, they talk about, this was just one aspect of what we did, but they don't actually talk about the process, so we can all learn from it and find out, what your guys' experiences are. And I think that is key and fundamental in this in this transitional time period that we're in archaeology. And I think with technology changing as fast as it is, we're going to be in this transitional period for a little while we all figure out exactly what we need and what works for what. So
thank you.
Thank you. And I think with that, we will call it. Thanks a lot, Paul, for joining me, and thanks everybody else.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for listening to the Archaeotech podcast. Links to items mentioned on the show are in the show notes at www.arcpodnet.com/archaeotech. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com and paul@lugal.com. Support the show by becoming a member at arcpodnet.com/members. The music is a song called Off Road and is license free from Apple. Thanks for listening.
This show is produced and recorded by the Archaeology Podcast Network, Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle, in Reno, Nevada, at the Reno Collective.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.arcpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Thanks again for listening to this episode and for supporting the Archaeology Podcast Network. If you want these shows to keep going, consider becoming a member for just $7.99 US a month. That's cheaper than a venti quad eggnog latte. Go to arcpodnet.com/members for more info.
Ready to level up your career? Text DISH to 44043 now to dive into a world of exciting technician opportunities at DISH. From cutting-edge technology to a supportive work environment, DISH offers the perfect platform for your success. Connect with us today to discover how you can be part of a dynamic team driving innovation. Connect today and join the DISH family, where innovation meets opportunity. Text DISH to 44043 to kickstart your journey towards a rewarding career.
To the teachers, assistants, and support staff who see potential in every child, Grand Canyon University recognizes you. We created the National Center for Teacher Preparation at GCU, along with a generous scholarship, so you can become a licensed teacher with paid benefits. Over 100 GCU alumni have been recognized award recipients, including Superintendent, Administrator, and Teacher of the Year. Find your purpose at Grand Canyon University. Private, Christian, affordable. Visit gcu.edu/parapro.